I was 12 years old the night I learned how thin the wall is between feeling safe and realizing you're not alone anymore. I didn't see a face. I didn't hear a voice. But I heard footsteps inside my bedroom while I was hiding in the dark, holding my breath, praying that whoever was in my house would leave before they found me. I'm 26 now, and I still remember every sound from that night like it just happened yesterday. My parents had left me home with my older brother for the evening. Zach was 18, technically old enough to babysit, but within an hour of them leaving, he told me he was heading out with friends. He made me promise not to tell our parents. I agreed without hesitation. At 12, having the whole house to myself felt like freedom. At first, it was fun. I grabbed snacks and settled into the den to watch a scary movie. In hindsight, that was a terrible idea. Being alone in a big, quiet house at night already messes with your head. Adding jump scares and eerie music was basically inviting panic. Halfway through the movie, I wasn't even paying attention to the screen anymore. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Floorboards creaking, wind brushing the windows, the refrigerator clicking on. Each noise made my stomach tighten. Every time the movie spiked in volume, I flinched and glanced over the back of the couch toward the staircase, half expecting to see someone standing there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I shut off the TV and sprinted upstairs like a scared kid running from imaginary monsters that follow you the moment the lights go out. I brushed my teeth as fast as possible in the bathroom connected to my room, trying to calm my nerves, telling myself I was being ridiculous. To distract myself, I fired up my Xbox and played Call of Duty Zombies for a few hours. The game pulled my focus just enough to push the anxiety down. Time slipped by without me noticing. Eventually, the match ended. Frustration kicked in, and I decided it was probably time to sleep. That's when I felt the vibration of the front door closing. At first, I felt relief. Zach must be home. I lay in bed listening to movement downstairs, but something felt off. Usually when he came home, he went straight to his room. Instead, I kept hearing faint footsteps, soft thumps, subtle shifting sounds that dragged on far longer than normal. A knot formed in my stomach. The fear from the movie came rushing back full force. I slipped out of bed and quietly looked out my bedroom window, expecting to see Zach's car in the driveway where he always parked. The driveway was empty. My heart dropped. I didn't have a phone. I was 12. The only way to call anyone was to leave my room and go downstairs to the house phone, and the idea of stepping into the dark hallway made my chest tighten. I quietly locked my bedroom door, knowing the cheap lock could easily be popped open from the other side. It didn't make me feel any safer. I scanned the room and decided the only real hiding place was the small crawl-in closet built into the wall. I squeezed inside, pulled the door shut gently, and forced myself to stay silent. I kept telling myself I was probably wrong. Maybe Zach parked somewhere else. Maybe I was just scared and imagining things. Then I heard someone touch the doorknob. The handle shifted. The door opened. Someone was inside my bedroom. I stayed completely frozen inside the closet, barely breathing, my hands pressed against my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Footsteps moved slowly across my bedroom floor. Not rushed, not heavy, careful. The floorboards creaked under the weight of someone walking just a few feet from where I was hiding. I could hear the faint shuffle of shoes, the soft scrape of something being nudged aside. Every tiny sound felt enormous in the silence. My mind raced through every horrible possibility. What if they opened the closet? What if they had a weapon? What if they knew I was in here? I tried to convince myself it had to be my brother, that he'd come back and was messing with something in my room. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Zach would have called my name. He wouldn't creep around in the dark. Whoever this was didn't want to be noticed. I heard something drag across the floor. The sound made my stomach twist. It sounded heavy, like furniture being shifted or something large being pulled slowly across the room. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Every second stretched into eternity. I was convinced that at any moment the closet door would open and a shadow would fill the doorway. My body felt locked in place, trapped between panic and silence. I barely dared to breathe. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time didn't make sense anymore. Then the footsteps moved closer to the doorway. I could hear them pause. My heart felt like it was going to explode. After what felt like forever, the footsteps finally retreated. The floor creaked softly as whoever was in my room moved away and exited into the hallway. The door closed. The house went quiet again. I didn't move. I stayed curled up inside the closet, shaking uncontrollably, listening for any sign they might come back. Every small noise made my muscles tense. I had no idea how much time passed. It felt like hours, but I refused to come out until I was absolutely sure the house was empty. Eventually, I heard my brother's voice echo through the house. "Hey, where are you?" Relief slammed into me so hard I almost cried. A few seconds later, Zach rushed into my room and called my name again, sounding annoyed and confused. I slowly pushed the closet door open and stepped out, still trembling. The first thing he did was snap at me, asking why I was hiding in his room and what I had done to the place. That's when the reality hit both of us. My drawers were pulled open. My stuff was scattered across the floor. My game console was gone. So was one of the TVs from the hallway. Someone had broken into the house. While I was hiding in the closet, they had been stealing our things. I tried to explain everything as fast as I could. The sounds, the door opening, the footsteps in my room. My voice was shaky and broken, but Zach finally understood. His face went pale. We checked the rest of the house together, every room, every door, every window. More things were missing: electronics, small valuables. The front door had been left unlocked. Zach immediately called the police. We waited together in the living room, every sound making us jump. When the officers arrived, they took statements, wrote down what was stolen, and searched the property. There were no clear leads, no fingerprints, no witnesses, just an empty house, and the knowledge that someone had been inside while I was hiding only a few feet away. A few hours later, our parents came home. My dad was furious. He yelled at Zach for leaving me alone and for leaving the door unlocked. My mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and kept saying she was just grateful I was safe. Nothing was ever recovered. Zach ended up paying back the cost of everything that was stolen over the next year. He never left me alone again after that. But the damage had already been done. Even now, years later, I still remember exactly how the floor sounded under those footsteps. I still remember the silence in that closet. The feeling that someone was standing just feet away from me in the dark, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Sometimes, when my house is quiet at night, I still feel that same fear crawl back into my chest, because I know how close I came to being found. Story 2. I learned very early in life that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wear familiar faces. Sometimes they knock on your door and use a voice you trust. And sometimes, the people who protect you may carry secrets you're never meant to uncover. I was barely old enough to start school when this happened. My parents had just separated, and for a while, I lived with my grandparents in a quiet little town where everyone knew each other. It was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked, neighbors waved from their porches, and nothing ever seemed dangerous. My uncle lived with us too, so I was almost never alone. Almost. One of our neighbors, I'll call him David, was around our house constantly. He watched sports with my grandpa, drank beers with my uncle, helped fix engines in the driveway, and showed up for barbecues like family. To me, he wasn't a stranger at all. He was just part of the neighborhood. That's what made that night so confusing and so terrifying. One evening, my grandma went out to bingo, and my grandpa offered to drive into town to pick her up later. He asked if I wanted to come along. I didn't. Cartoons were on. I didn't want to miss them. Before leaving, he reminded me of the rule I'd heard 100 times already. Don't open the door for anyone," I promised. The truck pulled out of the driveway and the house went quiet. The silence felt strange without the TV noise or footsteps in the hallway. I stayed on the couch, watching my show, completely unaware of how fast things were about to change. A knock echoed through the house. I jumped up and ran to the door, calling out instinctively, "Who is it?" A familiar voice answered, "David." He said he had just seen my grandpa leave and wanted to stop by. I told him my uncle wasn't home either. He replied casually that he already knew. They'd talked earlier. Then he asked if he could come inside. I hesitated. I remembered the rule. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers. He laughed lightly and said, "I'm not a stranger. You know me." And in my child's mind, he was right, so I unlocked the door. The moment it opened, something felt wrong. He stood far too close. He smelled strongly of alcohol. His eyes didn't focus properly. His body swayed slightly like he was struggling to keep his balance. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His hands landed on my shoulders. I instinctively leaned backward, uncomfortable but not yet afraid. I had seen drunk adults before. I assumed this was normal. I told him he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to my cartoons. He didn't let go. His grip tightened. His face changed. The friendly neighbor disappeared in an instant. His voice dropped into something sharp and angry. Words I don't even fully remember anymore, only the fear they planted inside me. My chest tightened. My stomach twisted. I tried to pull away. I couldn't. He dragged me toward the kitchen. That's when I saw the knife. He reached the counter in one rough movement and grabbed the largest knife sitting in the wooden block. The metal caught the kitchen light as he turned back toward me. My legs felt weak. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My body locked up in pure instinctive fear. He pressed the cold tip of the blade against my stomach. Not hard enough to break the skin, just hard enough to make me understand exactly what he was capable of. "Do you want to get hurt?" he asked quietly. His breath smelled like beer and something sour. His eyes were unfocused, but the intent behind them was terrifyingly clear. I started crying. That was a mistake. His hand shot up and covered my mouth, squeezing my cheeks until it hurt. His voice dropped into a harsh whisper right next to my ear. "Make another sound and I'll cut you. Tongue first, then your throat." The words didn't fully make sense to my young mind, but the threat did. He dragged the dull side of the blade slowly across my neck. Not enough to cut, enough to promise what could happen next. My entire body shook. I felt frozen inside my own skin. I couldn't scream. I couldn't fight him. I could barely breathe. Then, suddenly, headlights washed across the kitchen walls. A car door slammed outside. The sound sliced through the terror like lightning. Hope exploded in my chest. They were back. My grandparents were home. I tried to scream for help, but his hand clamped tighter over my mouth, crushing the sound before it escaped. He spun us both toward the doorway just as the front door opened. My grandma stepped inside. Her face changed instantly. The smile she had been wearing vanished into pure horror as her eyes locked onto him, holding me with a knife pressed against my body. She screamed my grandpa's name. The sound was raw, panicked, desperate. My grandpa burst through the doorway seconds later. He froze for only a heartbeat when he saw what was happening. Then something inside him snapped. He roared in fury and charged forward without hesitation. The movement startled David. He shoved me hard to the floor. I hit the ground, knocking the breath out of my lungs. My grandma rushed to me instantly, pulling me into her arms, shielding my face against her chest so I couldn't see what was happening. She kept repeating that I was safe now, that everything was okay. But I could still hear it. Shouting, furniture scraping, a violent struggle, heavy breathing. My grandpa yelling words I had never heard him say before. Pure rage in his voice. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. The front door slammed. When I finally looked up, David was gone. My grandpa stood shaking in the doorway, chest heaving, eyes burning with adrenaline and fury. He locked the door behind him and checked every window in the house before finally kneeling down in front of me. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. That night, everything changed. The house never felt the same after that night. Even as a child, I could feel it. The shift in the air, the way silence suddenly felt heavy instead of calm. Rooms that once felt safe started feeling like places where something bad could happen without warning. I slept with my bedroom door locked for years after that, even when my grandparents were home. Every unexpected sound made my heart jump. David never came back, not once. No apologies, no explanations, no sign of him anywhere in town. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. As I grew older, though, pieces of that night started coming back to me in sharper detail. I began realizing how calculated everything had been. He didn't knock randomly. He knew exactly when my grandparents would be gone. He knew my uncle wouldn't be home. He had watched the truck leave. He waited for silence. That wasn't an accident. That was planning. Years later, after my grandpa passed away, I was sitting with my grandma in the living room, going through old photos and sharing memories. At some point, the conversation drifted back to that night, the night he saved me. I told her how brave he had been, how fast he had reacted, how I still thought about it sometimes. Her expression changed, not into pride, into something closer to discomfort. She stared at the floor for a long moment before speaking. "That night, your grandpa had gone hunting," she said quietly. The words didn't register at first. "Hunting?" I asked. "At night?" She nodded slowly. "He said he needed to check something in the woods. He didn't usually hunt that late, but he left anyway." A cold chill crawled up my spine. That didn't match my memory at all. I remembered him leaving to pick her up from bingo. That was what I'd always believed. I asked her why he had really gone out. She hesitated. "I don't remember," she finally said. But her voice wasn't convincing. After that conversation, I started connecting dots I had never questioned before. The police were never called, no report was filed, no charges were pressed. David vanished from town completely. No one ever spoke about him again. My grandpa was well known in the community. Respected, trusted. He hunted regularly. He had friends in law enforcement. If anyone saw him driving late at night with equipment in the back of his truck, nobody would question it, especially in a rural town. I'll never know exactly what happened after my grandparents rushed back into that house, but sometimes I wonder, did David really just leave town? Or did my grandpa make sure he never hurt anyone again? The thought sits heavy in my chest even now, because part of me believes that if my grandparents had arrived just a few minutes later, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. And part of me believes my grandpa knew exactly how close that was. Some monsters don't hide in the woods. Sometimes they knock on your front door. And sometimes the person who saves you isn't afraid to become a monster in return. Story 3. I learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is open your door to someone you think you know. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they sound like a familiar voice on your phone, asking for a small favor that turns into a nightmare. That night, I wasn't afraid of the dark, the house, or being alone. I was afraid of the person standing in my kitchen and what he might do next. This happened during spring break in 2020 when I was 15. My parents were out of town for a few nights, and I had the house to myself. I was in my bedroom scrolling on my phone when I got a call from a guy I barely talked to anymore. Someone from school I'll call Mason. It was strange to hear from him at all. Before I could even say hello, he asked what I was doing. I told him I was just home alone, not really doing anything. There was a short pause on the line, and then he asked if he could drop off a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Neil, because Neil needed somewhere to stay for the night. I didn't love the idea. I wanted a quiet night to myself and told Mason I wasn't really feeling company. But his tone changed. He suddenly sounded stressed, almost desperate. He kept pushing, asking me again and again to let Neil stay, like he was running out of options. Eventually, he offered me something stupid in exchange, something I shouldn't have agreed to. I gave in. Looking back, it was one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. I'd already heard rumors about Neil acting strangely at school. Random laughing, strange comments, weird behavior in class. I brushed it off at the time, assuming he was just being weird for attention. I didn't realize how serious it was until he showed up at my front door. Mason dropped him off and was about to leave when he suddenly grabbed Neil by the shoulders, looking genuinely emotional, and begged him not to do that thing. Neil stared back blankly and calmly said he understood. That should have been my warning. The moment Mason drove away and the door closed behind Neil, the energy in the house shifted. The first thing Neil asked me was if all the doors were locked. My stomach dropped. I told him they were and asked why. He insisted I show him. I walked him down the hallway and checked the doors just to reassure him, even though every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then Neil suddenly raised his hand in the air and flashed a wide, unsettling smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. He held it there for a moment, then dropped his arm without saying a word. I laughed nervously, trying to pretend the situation wasn't deeply uncomfortable. He asked for water, and we went into the kitchen. As I grabbed drinks from the fridge, I noticed him standing too close to the drawer where the utensils were kept. He slowly slid the drawer open and hovered his hand over the contents. My heart slammed into my chest. Without thinking, I stepped in and shut the drawer before he could touch anything. He just stared at me, completely calm, and let out a small laugh, like it was all some kind of joke. But I didn't feel like it was a joke. For the first time in my life, I felt real fear. Not nervousness, not anxiety. Real, cold, instinctive fear. The kind that tells you something is wrong and you need to get out of the situation fast. I knew I had to get him out of my house. Neil suddenly suggested we go for a walk to the park nearby. I agreed immediately, acting normal. We walked toward the door, and I let him step outside first. I told him I needed to grab my shoes. The moment he was outside, I locked the door. My hands were shaking as I called my brother and told him everything as fast as I could. Then I moved anything potentially dangerous out of reach and waited upstairs, listening for any noise outside. My brother arrived within minutes with a few friends. They spoke with Neil outside while I stayed inside, watching through a window. Neil was rambling about strange theories and making claims that didn't make sense. It was clear something wasn't right with him. Eventually, they convinced him to leave and took him home. Later, I called Mason and demanded to know what had been happening in the car before he dropped Neil off. Mason admitted that Neil had been saying disturbing things and seemed mentally unstable. Mason panicked and just wanted to get rid of him, which explained why he'd sounded so desperate earlier. It turned out later that Neil had taken something that seriously affected his mental state. I still think about that night sometimes, about how close I came to trusting the wrong person, about how small decisions can spiral into something dangerous. If I hadn't paid attention in that kitchen, I don't like to imagine what could have happened. Story 4. I learned very early that fear doesn't always come from the dark. Sometimes it comes in the middle of a bright, ordinary afternoon, when nothing bad is supposed to happen. Sometimes it comes from realizing that someone is already inside your home, watching you, learning your name, waiting for night to fall. I was only 10 years old when I understood how thin the line is between safety and nightmare. That day, my mom was heading out to do grocery shopping. She asked if I wanted to come with her, and I remember making a huge fuss about staying home. It was warm, sunny, and perfect weather to play outside. All I wanted to do was shoot basketball in the street. I promised her nothing bad would happen and that she'd only be gone for a couple of hours. Eventually, she gave in and let me stay. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed the old basketball from the garage and started playing in front of the house. We had a hoop mounted near the curb, and I spent a long time running drills by myself, pretending I was taking game-winning shots. talking to myself like a commentator, sweating under the afternoon sun. After a while, I stopped to catch my breath. I leaned on the ball, bouncing it lazily against the pavement, and glanced around the quiet neighborhood. That's when I looked up at the house. In the upstairs window, I saw a dark shape standing behind the glass. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow, like someone had stepped back from the sunlight and blended into the room. I stared at it for a second, confused, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then the shape shifted slightly. Not a reflection, not a trick of light. Someone was standing there, looking down at the street. My stomach dropped. Nobody in my family was supposed to be home. My sister was away at college. My dad was still at work. My mom was across town shopping. The window belonged to my sister's bedroom, and the blinds were partially open, just enough for a silhouette to stand clearly behind them. I let the basketball fall out of my hands without even realizing it. I didn't see a face, no features, just a human outline. Tall, unmoving, watching. My brain panicked and chose the worst possible option. I ran toward the house. I sprinted around the side yard, burst through the back gate, slammed the door behind me, and shouted up the stairs, asking who was home. My voice cracked as I yelled, already shaking. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice answered from upstairs. "Brad, come upstairs." It wasn't my mom's voice. It wasn't my dad's. It wasn't my sister's. It wasn't deep like a grown man trying to sound scary either. It sounded controlled, almost normal, like someone carefully trying to imitate calm. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to move. I didn't go near the stairs. I ran straight through the house, grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen counter, and bolted back outside as fast as my legs could carry me. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone as I dialed my mom's number. When she answered, I blurted out that someone was inside the house. At first, she thought I was joking. She told me not to mess around with things like that and said she was almost done shopping. I tried to explain, but my voice cracked and broke apart. I started crying, telling her someone had spoken to me from upstairs, someone I didn't recognize, someone who knew my name. I begged her to come home right now. That's when her tone changed. She told me to stay outside and said she was leaving the store immediately. I was still standing in the driveway when I saw her car turn onto our street. Almost at the same time, a police cruiser pulled in behind her. She jumped out of the car and ran straight to me, gripping my shoulders and asking where I had seen the person. I pointed toward the upstairs window. The officers went inside first while my mom waited outside with me. I couldn't take my eyes off that window. I half expected the shadow to appear again at any second, staring back down at us. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Eventually, one of the officers came back out and told us they had searched the house. Every room, closets, under the beds, even the attic. They found nothing. No broken windows, no forced doors, no sign that anyone had ever been inside. Relief washed over me for a brief moment, followed immediately by confusion. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. But now there was nothing to prove it. After the police left, my mom started acting unsure. She said she believed me, but her voice didn't match her words. She warned me that if she ever found out I had been making the story up, I would be in serious trouble for scaring her and wasting police time. I kept insisting I wasn't lying. She nodded, but I could tell doubt had settled in her mind. That night, I couldn't relax. Every sound in the house made my stomach tighten. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, the creak of the floorboards as the house cooled down after sunset. I kept replaying the voice in my head. "Brad, come upstairs." I eventually forced myself into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin like it could protect me. It took a long time to fall asleep, but exhaustion finally pulled me under. I don't know how long I slept. I only know that something woke me. Not a dream, not a noise from outside. Something inside my room. I opened my eyes to darkness. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. My room felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy. like the air itself was holding its breath. My eyes slowly adjusted, and familiar shapes began to form in the shadows. My dresser against the wall, the outline of my desk, the closet door slightly open. Then I saw something that didn't belong. A tall shape stood near the foot of my bed. It wasn't moving, not shifting its weight, not breathing loud enough for me to hear. Just standing there, perfectly still, like it had been frozen into the darkness. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were telling me. I told myself it was a shadow, a pile of clothes, a trick of the moonlight, anything except what it actually was. Then the shape moved, just slightly, enough for me to understand with absolute certainty that it was a person. My lungs locked up, my body froze. I couldn't scream yet. The fear was too sudden, too overwhelming, like my nervous system had short-circuited. The figure took a step. That broke whatever spell had me locked in place. I screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It ripped out of me, raw and broken, like my throat didn't belong to me anymore. The shadow exploded into motion. In 2 fast strides, the man crossed my room and grabbed the window frame. The glass rattled as he shoved it open. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the smell of night and damp leaves. He vaulted out onto the small awning below my window and vanished into the darkness. The entire thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. My door burst open immediately. My parents flooded into the room, turning on the light, shouting my name, trying to understand what had just happened. I was shaking so badly I could barely point toward the open window. My dad ran straight to it, leaned out, and then bolted downstairs and out the back door without even putting on shoes. He came back a few minutes later, breathless and pale, shaking his head. Gone. The police came again, this time taking the situation far more seriously. They searched the yard, the neighboring properties, the fence line, the trees behind the house. They dusted the windowsill, checked the awning, walked the perimeter with flashlights. Still nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no trace. What terrified everyone wasn't just that someone had broken in. It was that he had been inside long enough to know my name, long enough to watch me from my sister's window earlier that day, long enough to wait inside the house until nightfall, standing in my bedroom while I slept. No one ever figured out who he was or how long he'd been watching the house. We moved not long after that. Even now, years later, I still can't sleep with my bedroom door open. I still check windows twice before going to bed. And sometimes, when the house goes completely silent at night, I catch myself holding my breath, listening, half expecting to hear someone else breathing in the dark with me. Story 5. I always thought the last bus of the night was peaceful. No crowds, no noise. Just a handful of tired strangers staring out fogged windows, letting the darkness swallow the road. It felt like a quiet bubble drifting through sleeping neighborhoods. I used to enjoy that calm after long shifts at the warehouse. That changed the night I realized someone wasn't riding the bus to go home. They were riding it to follow me. It was late autumn, already cold enough that your breath lingered in the air. My shift ended just after midnight, and the last bus came at 12:40. If I missed it, I'd be walking almost 4 miles home through poorly lit streets and empty industrial blocks. That night, only 4 of us boarded. An older man sat near the front, headphones on, eyes closed. A woman in a hoodie took a seat halfway back, scrolling through her phone. I chose my usual spot near the rear window. The 4th passenger came in last. He hesitated at the door longer than anyone normally would. Tall, thin, hood pulled low, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. I didn't see his face clearly, but something about the way he stood, too still, too deliberate, made my skin tighten. He sat directly across from me. Not next to, not behind. Across. The bus pulled away, engine humming low. Streetlights streaked past the windows like fading stars. I tried to ignore the guy, scrolling through my phone, pretending the tension in my shoulders didn't exist. Every time the bus slowed, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking at me, Not constantly. Not openly. Just quick glances, long enough to confirm I was still there. I told myself I was imagining it. Late shift paranoia. Too much caffeine. Too many horror podcasts. 3 stops passed. No one got off. The woman finally stood and exited near a closed grocery store. The older man left a few minutes later near a quiet residential block. Now it was just me and him. The bus felt suddenly massive and hollow, every vibration echoing through the empty seats. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Tired eyes, tense jaw, breath faint in the cold window. When the bus slowed at the next stop, I stood up. Not my stop. I just wanted to see what he'd do. I stepped into the aisle and waited as the doors opened. Cold air rushed in. I pretended to stretch, like I was deciding whether to get off. He leaned forward slightly. Not standing, just enough to be ready. I sat back down. The doors closed, the bus continued. My pulse didn't slow. 2 stops later, I tried again. This time, I actually stepped onto the sidewalk. The bus doors hissed shut behind me. I stood there under a flickering streetlight, watching the bus pull away. For 2 seconds, relief washed over me. Then the bus stopped again. The doors opened. He stepped off. My stomach dropped. The bus pulled away, leaving us alone on a silent stretch of road bordered by dark trees and abandoned lots. The streetlight buzzed faintly overhead. Neither of us spoke. I turned and started walking toward the main road, keeping my pace steady, not running. My house was still nearly a mile away. My phone had 10% battery. Footsteps followed behind me. Not rushed, not slow, measured. Every time I sped up slightly, they matched me. When I slowed, they slowed too. I crossed the street. He crossed. I turned down a narrower side road lined with parked cars and dark houses. He followed. The realization settled in cold and heavy. This wasn't coincidence. This was intention. I stopped abruptly and turned around. He stopped about 15 feet away. The streetlight barely reached his face. I could finally see his eyes, wide, alert, unblinking. His mouth twitched slightly, like he was suppressing a smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. He tilted his head. For a moment, I thought he might speak. Instead, he took one slow step forward. Every instinct in my body screamed. I ran. My boots slapped against pavement, breath burning in my chest. I didn't look back. I cut between houses, hopped a low fence, nearly tripped over loose gravel in someone's driveway. I could hear him behind me, closer than I wanted. I ducked behind a row of trash bins near a closed mechanic shop and killed my phone screen. My lungs felt like they were tearing apart as I tried to breathe silently. Footsteps slowed, then stopped. Silence pressed in so hard my ears rang. I peeked through the gap between the bins. Nothing. No movement. No shadow. No sound. I stayed crouched for what felt like an hour, muscles shaking, waiting for him to step into view. He never did. When I finally forced myself to move, I didn't go home. I ran straight to the nearest open gas station and stayed there until sunrise. The police took a report. There were no cameras on that side road. No witnesses. No description strong enough to mean anything. Maybe he gave up. Maybe he lost me. Or maybe he realized something worse. That he now knew exactly where I got off the bus every night. I don't take the last bus anymore, and sometimes, when I'm walking home early in the evening and a bus passes me, I swear I see a familiar hooded silhouette staring out from the window, already waiting for another chance.